Keep Your Eyes on the Prize, a folk hymn popularized by the American Civil Rights Movement of the 1950s and 60s, recalls the narrative of Paul and Silas' capture and liberation in Philippi. According to our first reading from Acts of the Apostles, the crowd in Philippi joined the attack on Paul and Silas. They threw them into prison and instructed the jailer to guard them securely. When he received these instructions, he put them in the innermost cell and secured their feet to a stake. He put them in the innermost cell. This line lingered with me. What is the innermost cell, the place of imprisonment in your life? For me, it's the feelings of being trapped and confined and alone, feeling detached from other people, far from any feelings of autonomy or agency. And sometimes it is the fear of truly knowing myself. Many of us in the past year may have felt confined in an innermost cell of home-based work or schooling, and the closure of our most treasured social gathering places. Many have experienced the detachment and alienation born of unemployment, the death of a loved one, or the loss of a relationship. Many felt held captive by the persistent, pernicious oppression of racism, homophobia, classism, ageism, and other bigotry. Like the crowds at Philippi, these forces can be loud and strong. They have a power to silence us, weaken us, and cut deeply at our core. It is most fitting then that this reading lands here in the Easter season. In today's Gospel from John, Jesus says of his rising, "If I do not go, the advocate will not come to you. But if I go, I will send him to you. And when he comes, he will convict the world in regard to sin and righteousness and condemnation." We have been reminded many times that Easter is about new beginnings. Recently, I heard Father James Martin, the Jesuit author, say on a podcast that it is important that we as Christians actually believe in the resurrection. And he explains that for us to believe in the resurrection, we must believe that God can transform things for the better, including within ourselves. We witness God's transformative power in the first reading. About midnight, while Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God as the prisoners listened, there was suddenly such a severe earthquake that the foundations of the jail shook. All the doors flew open and the chains of all were pulled loose. God opened the gates of that innermost cell and freed his followers from their chains. Now let me caution that waiting for God to enact some great feat of nature may be the source of some prayers, but I fear it may be a distraction from our responsibility for the central message of this story. God is freeing Paul and Silas from literal chains, but more importantly, they are freed from the barriers and obstacles in their apostolic mission. The crowd and the magistrates of Philippi could not stop Paul and Silas from preaching the good news. Are we dwelling in prisons of fear and despair, or are we petitioning God to help us throw off these chains and live our faith courageously? What if Paul and Silas had given into despair? What if they had given up their faith and accepted defeat? The Easter season commands us to rise up, to face our captors and our fears. Like Christ calling to Lazarus to come out, we can have confidence that God will not let our courage be in vain Like the cantor of today's psalm, we can proclaim, "When I called, you answered me. You built up strength within me." And the Lord will complete what he has done for me. What good news indeed. The past months have exhibited many examples of courage in our nation and in our church. For over a year, healthcare and other essential workers have stared down the pandemic with strength and grit and saved many lives. Since last summer, activists and politicians, judge and jury and ordinary citizens ignited a global movement for racial justice. In our church, many, including our parish's priests, stood up for the dignity and full equality and inclusion of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Catholics in all aspects of the life of the church. These are signs of hope, but we are never without the need for greater courage to see, judge, speak, and act. And finally, what happened to Paul and Silas' captor, the jailer? The text says, "He took them in at that hour of the night and bathed their wounds. He brought them up into his house and provided a meal, and with his household rejoiced at having come to faith in God." This story is also a sign of hope that our courage to live with integrity and authenticity, to strive for the right in the face of hostility, and to keep faith that God will complete what he has done for us, can raise us up, open us to greater liberation, and also transform our former captors, even when those captors may be our former fearful selves.